Under the darkness of the jungle, a man left behind a small box, with a kitten meowing softly inside. In the shadow of the trees, a wolf watched the scene, while the car's engine roared for the last time before disappearing. Hours later, another man, lonely and tired, was guided by destiny into the heart of the forest. The meeting between the old hunter and the defenseless cub would begin a story of hope in the midst of abandonment. Night fell over the dense Tennessee forest, bringing with it a blanket of darkness and mystery. The last rays of sunlight bid farewell, painting the sky with shades of orange and red, while shadows lengthened between ancient trees. The air was filled with the nocturnal sounds of the forest, the chirping of crickets, the distant croaking of frogs, and the occasional hooting of an owl. It was in this setting that an old rusty car came to an abrupt halt at the edge of a dirt road, its headlights cutting through the darkness like sharp knives. The engine roared one last time before shutting off, leaving only the tense silence of the forest. The driver's door opened with a creak, and a tall, thin man stepped out, looking nervously around. His eyes, dark and cold, scanned the surrounding area, making sure he was alone. Satisfied with the solitude of the place, he headed to the back seat of the car. There, curled up in an old cardboard box, was a small gray kitten, its large, frightened eyes shining in the darkness. "I'm sorry, little buddy," the man murmured, his voice betraying a mixture of guilt and determination. "But I can't take care of you anymore. It's better this way." With a quick movement, he picked up the box and walked a few meters into the forest. The kitten, sensing danger, began to meow softly, a sad and frightened sound that echoed in the night. The man hesitated for a moment, his heart tightening at the sound, but then hardened his expression and placed the box on the ground. "Good luck," he said, quickly turning and returning to the car. The roar of the engine once again broke the silence of the forest, and soon the vehicle disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only a cloud of dust and a frightened and confused kitten. The small feline, no more than a few months old, looked around with eyes wide with fear. The forest, previously just a distant backdrop seen from the window of a cozy house, now surrounded it on all sides, immense and threatening. It took a hesitant step out of the box, its tiny paws touching the damp and unfamiliar ground. A twig snapped somewhere nearby, causing the kitten to jump in fright and run back to the relative safety of its box. Inside, it curled up, trembling, its eyes fixed on the darkness surrounding it. The sounds of the forest, previously distant and harmless, now seemed threatening and too close. As the night progressed, the cold began to seep through the cardboard box. The kitten, accustomed to the warmth of a home, meowed softly, calling for its owner, for anyone who could help. But no one answered. Only the wind whispered through the leaves, bringing with it the smell of distant rain. Hours passed and hunger began to gnaw. The kitten, driven by the instinct for survival, ventured out of its box again. Its steps were uncertain, its soft paws unaccustomed to the uneven terrain of the forest. It sniffed the air, looking for something familiar, something it could eat. But everything around it was strange and terrifying. A sudden noise made the kitten turn quickly. Two bright eyes watched it from the darkness. It was a fox, thin and hungry, who saw in the small feline an easy prey. The kitten, paralyzed with fear, couldn't move. The fox approached slowly, its teeth bared in a low growl. It was then that another sound cut through the night, a distant but powerful howl. The fox stopped, its ears moving nervously. The howl sounded again, closer this time. Without hesitating further, the fox turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving the trembling kitten alive. The kitten's relief, however, was short-lived. The howl that had saved it from the fox was now approaching, and with it came a new threat. Among the trees emerged a large gray form, a she-wolf, her golden eyes shining in the darkness. The kitten, exhausted and scared, no longer had the strength to run. It cowered, closing its eyes and expecting the worst, but the attack it feared never came. Instead, it felt something warm and wet touch its fur, the wolf's muzzle sniffing it curiously. The she-wolf, an experienced female named Luna, looked at the small kitten with a mixture of surprise and compassion. Her maternal instincts, sharpened by her own cubs waiting for her in the den, manifested at the sight of this tiny, defenseless creature. For a moment, Luna hesitated. Her mission was to hunt, to bring food for her young, but something about that abandoned kitten touched her heart. With a sudden decision, she bent down and gently took the kitten by the scruff of its neck, in the same way she would with one of her cubs. The kitten, too surprised to react, found itself being carried through the forest. The gentle swaying of the wolf's gait and the warmth of her body were comforting after the long night of fear and cold. Without realizing it, the small feline began to relax, its eyes closing from exhaustion. As Luna skillfully ran between the trees, carrying her precious cargo, the forest around her seemed to observe in silence. The stars shone brightly in the sky, as if approving this strange act of compassion between species. The night, which had begun with abandonment and desperation, now carried a spark of hope. Dawn was breaking over the Tennessee forest, tinting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating a mosaic of light and shadow on the forest floor. In Luna's den, the gray wolf, the new day brought challenges and discoveries. Luna slowly opened her eyes, her body still curved protectively around her cubs and the small rescued kitten from the night before. For a moment, she observed with curiosity the feline sleeping peacefully among her offspring, so different and yet so similar. The maternal instinct that had led her to rescue it remained strong, but now it mixed with a practical concern. How was she going to care for this creature so different from herself? The cubs began to wake up, their small bodies stretching and their mouths opening in sleepy yawns. The movement woke the kitten, which blinked in confusion, momentarily disoriented by its new surroundings. Its eyes, large and frightened, scanned the den until they met Luna's serene gaze. For an instant, fear paralyzed the small feline. It was surrounded by predators, creatures that in any other context would see it as prey. But something in Luna's gaze, in the warmth of the bodies surrounding it, calmed it. Slowly, the kitten relaxed, allowing itself to feel the safety emanating from this strange adoptive family. Luna rose carefully, stretching her powerful muscles. It was time to hunt, to provide for her cubs and now also for this new member. With a soft growl, she indicated to her offspring to remain in the den. Then, to the kitten's surprise, she gently picked it up by the neck and placed it next to the other cubs. "Stay here," her gaze seemed to say. "You'll be safe." With silent steps, Luna left the den, leaving the cubs and the kitten under the protection of the shadows. The small feline, still unsure, curled up close to the wolf cubs, finding comfort in their warmth and company. The cubs, curious by nature, began to sniff and lick the kitten. Their clumsy and innocent games soon included the new member of the litter. The kitten, initially reluctant, found itself responding to their antics, its feline instincts mixing with wolf-like behavior in a curious and endearing dance. Meanwhile, Luna moved stealthily through the forest, her senses sharpened in search of prey. The responsibility of feeding an extra mouth weighed on her, making her hunt more urgent and determined than ever. After hours of patient stalking, she managed to catch a rabbit, enough to feed her unusual family. Back in the den, Luna found a scene that melted her mother's heart. The kitten and the cubs were sleeping in a pile, their bodies intertwined in a fraternal embrace that defied the laws of nature. For a moment, she stood watching, marveling at the innocence and adaptability of the young. The smell of food woke the hungry cubs, who pounced on their mother with enthusiasm. The kitten, however, stayed behind, unsure. Luna, noticing its hesitation, separated a small piece of meat and gently pushed it towards it with her muzzle. The kitten sniffed the offering cautiously. It had never eaten raw meat before, but hunger overcame any doubt. With clumsy but determined movements, it began to eat, its small teeth working hard to tear the meat. Luna watched attentively, making sure everyone ate. Her instinct told her that the kitten would need special care, a different diet from her cubs. But for now, this would have to be enough. As the days passed, the kitten adapted more and more to its new life in the den. It learned to play with the cubs, to hide when Luna indicated danger, and even began to imitate some of the wolf's sounds and behaviors. Its fur, previously soft and domesticated, became rougher and more resistant, adapting to wildlife. However, Luna knew that this situation couldn't last forever. The kitten grew differently from her cubs, its needs were different, and the dangers of the forest for a creature like it were innumerable. Each day, while hunting or watching over her unusual litter, Luna debated internally about the future, of the small feline. One afternoon, while the cubs and the kitten were playing near the entrance of the den, a distant sound caught Luna's attention. They were human voices, something rare in this deep part of the forest. Her first instinct was to gather her young and hide deep in the den. But then, an idea began to form in her mind. Luna looked at the kitten, which at that moment was clumsily trying to climb a low tree, imitating one of the more adventurous cubs. Although it had adapted surprisingly well, it was evident that it didn't fully belong to this wild world. Perhaps, Luna thought, humans could offer it a better, safer life. With this idea in mind, Luna began to plan. She carefully observed the direction of the human voices, memorizing smells and sounds. She knew she would have to act soon, before the kitten became too wild to adapt to a domestic life. That night, while the cubs and the kitten slept, Luna silently left the den. With cautious but determined steps, she headed towards where she had heard the human voices. She needed to find a safe place, a home where the kitten could grow and thrive. As she moved away from her home, Luna felt a mixture of determination and sadness. She knew she was about to embark on a dangerous mission, one that could change not only the kitten's life but also her own. But the maternal instinct that had led her to rescue the small feline now drove her to find it a better future. The full moon illuminated her path as she ventured into unknown territory, her heart beating with a mixture of fear and hope. What Luna didn't know was that her journey would lead her to an encounter that would change the fate of all involved, especially that of a solitary hunter named Jack Thompson. The dawn was tinting the sky with shades of pink and gold when Luna, the grey wolf, reached the edge of the forest. Her paws were tired after a whole night of exploration, but her determination did not waver. In the distance, she spotted a small wooden cabin, solitary and weathered by time. The smoke coming from the chimney indicated it was inhabited. Luna stopped, hidden among the bushes, observing cautiously. Her keen senses picked up the smell of freshly made coffee and the sound of footsteps inside the cabin. After a few moments, the door opened with a creak, and an older man stepped out onto the porch. Jack Thompson, a retired 70-year-old hunter, breathed in deeply the fresh morning air. His face, weathered by sun and wind, showed the marks of a life in nature. His eyes, though tired, still shone with a spark of vitality. He sat in an old rocking chair, holding a steaming cup of coffee between his calloused hands. Luna observed the man with curiosity. There was something in his posture, in the way he looked at the forest, that conveyed a sense of understanding and respect for nature. Perhaps, she thought, this human could be the answer she was seeking for the kitten. As Jack enjoyed his morning coffee, his thoughts wandered to his past. It had been just a few months since he had lost Fiero, his faithful dog and companion of many years. Loneliness weighed on him, making each day in the cabin a reminder of what he had lost. Suddenly, a movement at the edge of the forest caught his attention. Jack leaned forward, squinting to see better. To his amazement, he saw a grey wolf slowly emerging from the bushes. His first instinct was to reach for his rifle, always nearby out of habit, but something in the animal's attitude stopped him. Luna, gathering all her courage, took a few steps towards the cabin. She stopped at a prudent distance, her eyes fixed on Jack. There was no aggression in her posture, but a strange mixture of caution and plea. Jack remained still, fascinated by the scene. In all his years as a hunter, he had never seen a wolf voluntarily approach a human like this. "What do you want, friend?" he murmured softly, more to himself than to the animal. As if answering his question, Luna turned towards the forest and emitted a soft howl. Then she looked back at Jack, as if inviting him to follow her. The old hunter hesitated. His rational mind told him it was madness to follow a wild wolf into the forest. But something deeper, perhaps that connection with nature he had cultivated throughout his life, urged him to trust this strange encounter. With a sigh, Jack slowly rose from his chair. "This is crazy," he muttered, but still began to walk towards Luna. The wolf, seeing that the human was following her, entered the forest, stopping every so often to make sure Jack was still following. They walked like this for almost an hour, venturing into parts of the forest that even Jack, with all his experience, had rarely explored. Finally, Luna stopped near a large hollow tree. With a soft growl, she indicated to Jack to approach. The hunter, his heart beating rapidly from the walk and anticipation, cautiously approached. As he looked inside the hollow tree, his eyes widened in surprise. There, curled up and sleeping, were 3 wolf cubs and, to his amazement, a small grey kitten. "What the hell?" whispered Jack, unable to believe what he was seeing. Luna sat next to the tree, her gaze alternating between her offspring and the human. There was something in her eyes, a silent plea that Jack couldn't ignore. The old hunter slowly crouched down, observing the sleeping animals more closely. The kitten, as if sensing his presence, opened its eyes and meowed softly. Jack extended a trembling hand, allowing the small feline to smell him. At that moment, a long-forgotten memory surfaced in Jack's mind. Many years ago, when he was a young hunter, he had found an injured wolf cub. Instead of leaving it to die, he had secretly cared for it until it could return to its pack. That act of compassion had forever changed his perspective on hunting and nature. Looking at Luna, Jack understood what the wolf was asking of him. This kitten, by some twist of fate, had ended up under her care. But Luna knew she couldn't properly raise it in the wild world. "You want me to take it, don't you?" he asked Luna softly. The wolf, as if understanding, slightly tilted her head. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, weighing the decision. Taking the kitten would mean opening his heart again, risking another bond that would eventually break. But as he looked again at the small feline, he felt something inside him melt. "All right," he finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I'll take it." Carefully, he took the kitten in his arms. The little one, surprisingly, didn't resist. It seemed to sense that this change was for its own good. Luna observed the scene with a mixture of sadness and relief. She had fulfilled her mission, ensuring a better future for the kitten, even if it meant parting with it. Jack, holding the kitten against his chest, looked at Luna one last time. "Thank you," he said simply. "I'll take good care of it." As he walked away, carrying his precious cargo, Jack felt that something in his life was changing. The loneliness that had enveloped him since Fiero's death began to dissipate. Luna remained at the edge of the clearing, watching as the human and the kitten disappeared among the trees. With one last soft howl, a farewell and a blessing, she turned back to her cubs. Her heart was divided between the sadness of separation and the satisfaction of having done the right thing. Meanwhile, Jack walked back to his cabin, his mind full of plans and concerns. How would he care for this little being? Was he really prepared for this responsibility? But as he looked at the kitten, now sleeping peacefully in his arms, he felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. "Well, little one," he murmured, "it looks like it's you and me against the world now." The sun rose completely over the forest, marking the beginning of a new day and the start of an unexpected story between a lonely old hunter and a wild kitten, united by the selfless act of a grey wolf. The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of Jack's cabin, illuminating the unusual scene unfolding inside. The old hunter, accustomed to solitude and silence, now found himself speaking softly to a small grey bundle of fur that cautiously explored its new home. "Well, little one," Jack murmured as he watched the kitten sniff every corner of the room, "I suppose you'll need a name." His eyes scanned the room, seeking inspiration, until they settled on an old framed photograph. In it, a young Jack proudly held up a silver fish. "How about Silver? For your fur and for the good memories." The kitten, as if understanding, meowed softly and approached Jack, rubbing its small head against the old man's legs. This simple and innocent gesture touched something deep in the hunter's heart. With trembling hands, he lifted the kitten and brought it close to his face. "Welcome home, Silver," he whispered, feeling years of loneliness beginning to melt away in the presence of this small creature. The following days were a whirlwind of adjustments and discoveries for both. Jack, accustomed to caring only for himself, found himself improvising toys with strings and cork stoppers and converting old boxes into cozy beds for Silver. The kitten, for its part, alternated between moments of playful curiosity and periods of nostalgia, where it would meow softly while looking towards the forest. One afternoon, as Jack was preparing dinner, Silver began to meow insistently in front of the door. The old man, intrigued, opened the door to find Luna, the grey wolf, sitting patiently at the edge of the forest. Their eyes met, and for a moment, human and wolf shared a silent understanding. "She's come to see him, hasn't she?" Jack murmured. Carefully, he took Silver in his arms and took a few steps towards Luna. The kitten stirred excitedly, recognizing its former protector. Luna approached cautiously, sniffing the kitten and then Jack. She seemed to be assessing Silver's well-being and the old man's ability to care for it. Satisfied with what she saw, the wolf gave a soft bark and turned towards the forest, but not before casting one last glance that seemed to say, "Take good care of him." This encounter marked the beginning of a strange but comforting routine. Every few days, Luna would appear at the edge of the forest, sometimes alone, other times with one or two of her cubs. Jack and Silver would wait for her, and for a few brief moments, this mismatched group would share a bond that defied the logic of nature. As the weeks passed, Silver grew strong and healthy under Jack's care. The old hunter discovered a new energy in himself, laughing at the kitten's antics and finding comfort in its company during cold nights. However, the adaptation was not without challenges. Silver, initially raised by wolves, sometimes showed behaviors that puzzled Jack. The kitten would try to howl instead of meow, and occasionally Jack would find it hunting like a wolf in the backyard. One particularly cold night, Jack woke up startled. Silver wasn't in its usual bed. Worried, the old man searched the entire cabin until a sound led him to the porch. There, under the moonlight, he found Silver sitting, looking towards the forest and emitting a strange sound, half meow, half howl. Jack's heart tightened as he understood the little one's dilemma. Silver was caught between two worlds, the wild one it came from and the domestic one it was learning to belong to. "Oh, Silver," Jack whispered, sitting next to the kitten and gently stroking its fur. "I know it's difficult, but we'll find a way for both worlds to be part of you." That night marked a turning point. Jack set out to help Silver find a balance between its wild nature and its new domestic life. He began taking it on short walks along the edge of the forest, allowing it to explore under his watchful eye. He taught it to hunt mice in a civilized manner, combining feline techniques with what Silver had learned from the wolves. During one of these walks, they encountered Luna and her cubs, now almost adults. To Jack's surprise and delight, Silver interacted with them with a perfect blend of feline and lupine behaviors. It played, scampered, and even tried to howl along with its former adoptive siblings, but always returning to Jack's side, as if to assure him that this was its home now. As autumn gave way to winter, the relationship between Jack and Silver deepened. The kitten had become the perfect companion, independent enough not to be a burden, but always present with its affection and company. One afternoon, as snow began to fall gently outside the cabin, Jack sat in his old rocking chair, with Silver curled up in his lap. Looking out the window at the snowy forest, the old man reflected on the unexpected turns his life had taken. "You know, Silver," he murmured, gently scratching behind the kitten's ears, "when I lost Fierro, I thought that was the last time I'd open my heart to another living being. But look at me now, talking to a cat that thinks it's half wolf." Silver purred in response, as if understanding every word. "You've taught me that it's never too late for new beginnings," Jack continued, his voice laden with emotion. "That family can be found in the most unexpected places." As the sun set, tinting the winter sky with shades of pink and gold, Jack felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. At that moment, with Silver dozing in his lap and the silent forest stretching beyond his window, he knew he had found something precious, a new purpose, a new family. What Jack didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The challenges and adventures awaiting him and Silver were just starting, and the bond between an old hunter and a kitten raised by wolves would be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. Spring arrived in the Tennessee forest, bringing with it new colors and sounds. Jack's cabin, once a silent refuge, now brimmed with life. Silver, no longer a kitten but a young and vigorous cat, had become a constant and comforting presence in the old hunter's life. One sunny morning, as Jack was having his coffee on the porch, watching Silver chase butterflies in the garden, an unexpected noise broke the tranquility of the moment. The sound of an engine approaching on the dirt road made both man and cat turn their heads curiously. An old jeep appeared between the trees, raising a cloud of dust in its wake. Jack slowly stood up, squinting to make out the driver. When the vehicle stopped in front of the cabin, the old man's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the figure getting out of the jeep, although years had passed since he last saw him. "Mike," Jack called, his voice mixed with surprise and a hint of apprehension. The newcomer, a man in his 40s of robust build and piercing gaze, approached with a firm step. "Jack," he greeted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's been a long time." Mike Carson was the son of an old friend of Jack's, and in his youth had been like an apprentice to the hunter. However, their paths had separated years ago due to disagreements about hunting ethics and conservation. "What brings you here, Mike?" Jack asked, trying to maintain a cordial tone despite the tension he felt. Mike looked around, his eyes briefly stopping on Silver, who was observing the newcomer cautiously from the edge of the porch. "Business, Jack. The world is changing, and this land is worth more than you think." The conversation that followed was tense. Mike revealed that he represented a development company planning to build a tourist complex in the area. They needed Jack to sell his property, which included not only the cabin but also a considerable expanse of forest. "Think about it, Jack," Mike insisted. "At your age, wouldn't you prefer to live comfortably in the city? This place is dangerous for a man alone." Jack felt his blood boiling. "I'm not alone," he responded firmly, looking at Silver, who had approached and was now rubbing against his legs, as if offering support. "And this land is my home, it's not for sale." Mike frowned, his false cordiality disappearing. "Be reasonable. This project will bring progress to the region. You can't stop development." "I can try," Jack replied, straightening his back. "Now, if you have nothing else to say, I'd appreciate it if you left." After Mike left, leaving behind a cloud of dust and veiled threats, Jack sat heavily in his rocking chair. Silver jumped onto his lap, purring softly as if trying to calm him. "Oh, Silver," the old man sighed, absent-mindedly petting the cat. "It seems our troubles are just beginning." In the following days, the tranquility of their life in the forest was disturbed. Several men in suits appeared, taking measurements and asking questions. Jack watched them warily from his porch, feeling that the world he loved so much was under threat. One night, while Jack was sleeping, Silver woke up startled. Its keen senses, inherited from its time with the wolves, picked up something unusual. It silently slid to the window and saw figures moving in the darkness near the edge of the forest. The cat meowed urgently, waking Jack. Together they watched in horror as several men placed markers and tapes delimiting areas of the forest. "They're preparing to log," Jack murmured, his voice laden with sadness and anger. "We can't allow it, Silver. This forest is home to many creatures, including Luna and her pack." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Jack, revitalized by the urgency of the situation, began to mobilize. He contacted old friends, conservationists, and local journalists. Silver, sensing the agitation, became more vigilant than ever, patrolling the surroundings of the cabin and alerting Jack to any intruders. One afternoon, while Jack was reviewing old maps looking for evidence that the land was a protected reserve, Silver began to meow insistently at the door. Upon opening it, Jack found himself face to face with Luna. The wolf, now older but still majestic, was not alone. Behind her, half hidden among the bushes, were several members of her pack. And not just wolves. Jack saw with amazement that there were deer, raccoons, and even a couple of young jaguars. "Incredible," Jack whispered. He then understood that Luna had somehow grasped the threat looming over the forest. She had gathered the forest creatures, as if wanting to show Jack that he was not alone in his fight. Silver approached Luna, and for a moment, cat and wolf looked at each other intently. Then, to Jack's surprise, Silver emitted a sound that was a mix between a meow and a howl. Luna responded with a soft howl, and soon the entire forest seemed to join in a wild symphony. Jack felt tears filling his eyes. This moment, this improbable union of such diverse creatures, gave him a new determination. "Thank you," he said aloud, though he wasn't sure if he was addressing Luna, Silver, or the forest itself. "We won't let them destroy our home." As the animals silently dispersed into the night, Jack and Silver remained on the porch, observing the forest that had become their responsibility to protect. The old man knew that the battle ahead would be difficult, but with Silver by his side and the unexpected support of the forest creatures, he felt he had a chance. What Jack didn't know was that this was just the beginning of a series of events that would test not only his determination, but also the special bond between him, Silver, and the wild world that surrounded them. The fight for the forest was just beginning, and with it would come revelations that would forever change life in the small cabin at the edge of the Tennessee wilderness. Winter advanced forcefully over the region, covering the forest and Jack's cabin with a white and silent mantle. The days had become shorter and the nights longer, forcing the old hunter and his unusual feline companion to spend more time inside the cabin. One particularly cold morning, Jack woke up with an uneasy feeling. The air felt dense, charged with a tension that only years of experience in nature allowed him to perceive. He went out to the porch, with Silver following closely, and observed the grey and threatening sky. "A storm's coming, Silver," he murmured, absent-mindedly petting the cat's head. "And it looks like it's going to be a big one." With the efficiency of someone accustomed to facing the whims of nature, Jack began to prepare. He stacked extra firewood next to the fireplace, checked his provisions, and secured the windows and doors of the cabin. Silver watched everything with curiosity, not fully understanding its human companion's concern. As the day progressed, the wind began to blow forcefully, howling between the trees and making the wooden walls of the cabin creak. Snow started to fall, first in soft flakes and then in furious gusts that whitened the outside world. Jack and Silver curled up by the fire, listening to the roar of the storm outside. The old hunter told stories of past winters, of storms he had survived, and of the savage beauty of nature in its rawest state. Silver listened attentively, its eyes shining in the firelight, as if understanding every word. As night fell and the storm intensified, Jack noticed that Silver was becoming increasingly restless. The cat paced back and forth, meowing softly and looking insistently towards the door. "What's wrong, friend?" Jack asked, intrigued by his companion's behavior. Suddenly, a distant howl cut through the roar of the storm. Jack jumped to his feet, immediately recognizing the sound. It was Luna, and she sounded distressed. Without thinking twice, Jack began to put on his thickest coat and snow boots. "I can't leave her out there, Silver," he said, as the cat looked at him with a mixture of concern and determination. "She saved your life, and now she might need our help." Opening the door, Jack was greeted by a gust of icy wind and snow. Silver, to his surprise, went ahead, jumping into the deep snow without hesitation. "Silver, no!" Jack shouted, but the cat was already several meters ahead, its grey fur almost invisible in the snowstorm. Having no other choice, Jack followed Silver into the storm. The wind howled around him, snow hit his face, and cold seeped into his bones. But Silver seemed to know exactly where to go, guiding Jack through the snowy forest with surprising certainty. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached a clearing. There, precariously protected under a fallen tree, was Luna. By her side, shivering from cold, were two small cubs, probably born during the autumn. Jack approached cautiously, aware that a mother wolf could be dangerous if she felt threatened. But Luna, recognizing him, only emitted a soft whimper. She was injured, a paw trapped under a heavy branch of the fallen tree. "Easy, girl," Jack murmured, slowly approaching. Carefully, he began to remove the snow and smaller branches, working to free Luna's paw. Silver, meanwhile, approached the cubs, offering them warmth and comfort. Finally, after several minutes of effort, Jack managed to free Luna. The wolf stood up with difficulty, her paw clearly hurt, but not broken. "You can't stay here," Jack said, looking around. The storm was worsening by the moment, and he knew the wolves wouldn't survive the night in these conditions. Making a decision that went against everything he had learned as a hunter, Jack took off his coat and wrapped the two cubs in it. "Come on," he said, addressing both Luna and Silver. "You're all coming to the cabin." The journey back was arduous. Jack carried the cubs, while Luna limped by his side and Silver led the way. The wind howled, the snow blinded them, and more than once Jack feared they had gotten lost. But Silver, with unwavering determination, guided them back to the safety of the cabin. Once inside, Jack quickly lit the fire, creating a warm nest of blankets near the fireplace. He placed the cubs there, and Luna curled up next to them, licking their fur to warm them. Silver, exhausted but satisfied, joined the group, forming a strange but moving family in front of the fire. Jack sat in his chair, observing the scene with a mixture of amazement and emotion. In his long life, he had never imagined he would find himself sharing his home with a family of wolves and a cat that believed it was one of them. As the storm raged outside, Inside the cabin reigned a strange but perfect peace. Jack understood that he was witnessing something extraordinary, a moment when the barriers between species, between the wild and the domestic, vanished in the face of the need for survival and compassion. "Who would have thought?" he murmured to himself, a smile forming on his wrinkled face. "An old hunter, a cat, a wolf and her cubs. What a strange family we've formed." Silver, as if understanding, raised its head and looked at Jack with eyes full of affection and trust. At that moment, the old hunter knew that his life had changed forever, and that the adventures awaiting them were just beginning. As the night progressed and the storm began to subside, Jack stayed awake, watching over his unusual family. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, how he would explain this to the few neighbors he had, or how he would handle this unique situation. But of one thing he was certain: he would do everything possible to protect and care for these creatures that fate had put in his path. With these thoughts, Jack leaned back in his chair, letting the warmth of the fire and the soft sound of the animals breathing lull him. Tomorrow would be a new day, full of challenges and discoveries. But for now, on this stormy night, they had found a refuge not just from the cold and snow, but also from the loneliness and isolation that had for so long been part of their lives. The days following Luna and the forest animals' visit were a whirlwind of activity in Jack's small cabin. The old hunter, renewed by a fierce determination, immersed himself in a legal and media battle to protect the forest that had become his home and that of so many creatures. Silver, always attentive, became Jack's tireless guardian. The cat seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, staying alert for any intruders and offering silent comfort during the long nights when the old man stayed awake, reviewing documents and making calls. One morning, as Jack was having his coffee on the porch, a familiar noise caught his attention. Mike's old Jeep was approaching on the dirt road, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him, a caravan of vehicles advanced, carrying heavy machinery and men with construction helmets. Jack stood up, his heart pounding. Silver, sensing the tension, bristled at his side, ready to defend their home. Mike got out of his vehicle, his face a mask of false sympathy. "Jack," he began, "I gave you time to reconsider, but progress can't wait. We have all the necessary permits to start construction today." The old man looked beyond Mike, towards the men who were beginning to unload equipment. "This is illegal," he declared firmly. "This land is a protected reserve. I have documents that prove it." Mike smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Your old papers mean nothing against the new development permits. It's time for you to step aside, old man." Just when the situation seemed most desperate, a sound filled the air. It was a howl, long and deep, that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The workers stopped, looking nervously towards the forest. From among the trees emerged Luna, majestic and fierce, but she wasn't alone. Behind her, a procession of forest animals advanced: wolves, deer, raccoons, and even the young jaguars. They stopped at the edge of the forest, forming a living barrier between the intruders and their home. Mike and his men backed away, surprised and frightened by this unexpected demonstration of nature. "What the hell is this?" Mike muttered, his confidence visibly crumbling. Jack stepped forward, Silver at his side. The cat, in a gesture that seemed to defy nature itself, emitted a sound that was half meow, half howl. Luna responded, and soon the entire forest seemed to join in a wild and beautiful chorus. "This," Jack said, his voice charged with emotion, "is the forest defending itself. It's the voice of those who cannot speak for themselves." At that moment, the sound of sirens filled the air. Several police and forest ranger vehicles appeared on the road, closely followed by a couple of local news vans. A young woman with a forest ranger badge quickly approached. "Jack Thompson?" she asked. When the old man nodded, she continued, "I'm Officer Garcia. We received your complaint and the evidence you sent. These men have no legal permit to be here or to log this protected forest." Mike, seeing his plan crumbling, tried to protest, but Officer Garcia silenced him with a severe look. "Mr. Carson, you'll have to come with us to answer some questions about these supposed permits." As the police escorted Mike and his men off the property, reporters approached Jack, eager to capture the story of the old hunter who had gathered the forest animals to protect their home. Jack, overwhelmed by the events, crouched down to pet Silver. "We did it, friend," he whispered. The cat purred in response, its eyes fixed on Luna and the other animals still watching from the edge of the forest. As the commotion calmed down and the vehicles began to leave, Jack approached the edge of the forest. Luna took a step forward, meeting the old man halfway. For a moment, man and wolf looked at each other intently, a silent understanding passing between them. "Thank you," Jack said softly. Luna slightly inclined her head as if accepting his gratitude before turning and guiding the animals back to the safety of the forest. That night, as Jack sat in his rocking chair with Silver curled up in his lap, he reflected on the day's events. The battle wasn't over, he knew. There would be more challenges to come, more attempts from those who saw the forest only as a resource to exploit. But looking at Silver, remembering the improbable union of creatures that had gathered to defend their home, Jack felt renewed hope. He had found his purpose, his family, in this wild corner of the world. "You know, Silver," he murmured, gently scratching behind the cat's ears, "I think we're exactly where we're supposed to be." Silver purred in response, its eyes shining with an intelligence that seemed beyond that of a common cat. Together, man and cat, guardian of the forest and bridge between two worlds, looked towards the future, ready to face any challenge that might come. What Jack didn't know was that the greatest challenge was yet to come. A revelation that would shake the foundations of everything he believed he knew about his past and Silver's. But for now, in the stillness of the night, with the sounds of the forest like a soft lullaby, Jack and Silver rested, grateful for the day's victory and the home they had protected. Summer arrived in the Tennessee forest, bringing with it hot days and starry nights. Life in Jack's cabin had found a new rhythm after the winter's events. The news of the old hunter who had united the forest animals to protect their home had spread, attracting the attention of conservationists and curious onlookers alike. One particularly hot morning, as Jack was watering his small garden, an unfamiliar vehicle approached on the dirt road. The old man straightened up, squinting to see better. At his side, Silver tensed, ready to defend their home if necessary. A middle-aged woman got out of the car, her graying hair tied in a tight bun. She carried a briefcase and her posture denoted a mixture of professionalism and nervousness. "Jack Thompson?" the woman asked, approaching with a determined step. "That's me," Jack responded, wiping his hands on his pants. "How can I help you?" The woman took a deep breath as if preparing for something difficult. "My name is Emily Vance. I was the personal assistant to your brother, Robert Thompson." Jack stood still, the color draining from his face. "There must be a mistake," he said with a trembling voice. "I don't have any brothers. I'm an only child." Emily gently shook her head. "I'm afraid that's not true, Jack, and there's a lot you need to know." The next few minutes were a whirlwind for Jack. Emily explained that Robert, his older brother, had recently passed away. But the most shocking revelation was that Robert had been the owner of the company that had tried to buy and develop the forest. "Robert spent his last days regretting his actions," Emily explained as Jack listened in shock. "He asked me to come see you, to deliver this and tell you the truth." Emily took out a thick envelope and an old photo album from her briefcase. With trembling hands, Jack opened the album. The first pages showed two small boys playing in a yard that seemed vaguely familiar. In one photo, an older man held the two boys, his face a younger version of Jack's own. "Is that my father?" Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. Emily nodded. "You and Robert were separated when you were very young. Your parents died in an accident, and for reasons that Robert never fully understood, you were sent to different homes. Robert spent years looking for you, but when he finally found you, he was the man behind the company that wanted to destroy my home," Jack completed, the realization falling on him like a weight. "Robert didn't know it was your forest, your home," Emily explained. "When he realized, he tried to stop everything, but things had gone too far. His illness prevented him from coming personally." Jack sat heavily in his rocking chair, overwhelmed by the revelations. Silver, sensing his distress, jumped onto his lap, offering silent comfort. Emily continued explaining that Robert, on his deathbed, had signed legal documents permanently protecting the forest and transferring a considerable sum of money in Jack's name. "He wanted to make amends for his mistakes," Emily said softly, "and he hoped that somehow you could reconcile, even if it was after his death." As Jack processed all this information, his eyes fell on a particular photo in the album. It showed his supposed mother holding a grey kitten, surprisingly similar to Silver. "That cat," Jack murmured. Emily smiled sadly. "Ah, yes. Robert mentioned that your family always had a special connection with grey cats. He said it was like a family tradition, though I never fully understood why." Jack looked at Silver, who returned his gaze with its intelligent eyes. Suddenly, many things started to make sense. The immediate connection he felt with Silver, the way the cat seemed to understand everything that happened around them, its ability to communicate with the forest animals. "Silver," Jack whispered, "have you been taking care of me all this time?" In response, Silver purred softly and pressed its head against Jack's hand. Emily, noticing the exchange, smiled. "Robert used to say these cats were more than just pets. He called them forest guardians. I thought it was just a superstition, but seeing your cat—" Jack nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "Silver is much more than a cat. It's my family, my connection to this place and apparently to my past." That night after Emily left, promising to return with more information and documents, Jack sat on his porch, looking towards the forest. Silver was by his side, as always. "We have a lot to process, friend," Jack said, gently stroking Silver's fur. "Hey, brother I never knew. A forgotten past and apparently a mission that goes beyond what we imagined." Silver meowed softly, as if understanding every word. In the distance, a howl resonated in the night. Luna and her pack, reminding them that they weren't alone in this new adventure that was opening up before them. Jack smiled, feeling a mixture of nostalgia, sadness, and hope. "It seems our work here is just beginning, Silver. We have a legacy to protect and maybe a family to rebuild." As the night progressed, man and cat remained silent, contemplating the forest they now knew was their destiny to protect. The day's revelations had changed everything, but they had also strengthened their resolution. Together they would face whatever came, guardians of an ancestral secret and protectors of a forest that held more mysteries than they had ever imagined. The days following Emily's revelation were a whirlwind of emotions for Jack. He spent hours reviewing the photo album, rediscovering a forgotten childhood and a family he never knew he had. Silver, faithful as ever, remained by his side, offering silent comfort in moments of confusion and sadness. One morning, as Jack was having his coffee on the porch, he noticed something unusual about Silver. The cat seemed restless, constantly looking towards the forest with an intensity the old man had never seen before. "What's wrong, buddy?" Jack asked, but Silver only meowed softly in response, its eyes fixed on the dense forest. Suddenly, Silver leapt from the porch and ran towards the trees. Jack, surprised, called after it, but the cat didn't look back. Without a second thought, the old man stood up and followed his feline companion, venturing into the forest. The chase led him down paths he had never explored before. Jack was surprised by his own agility as he dodged low branches and jumped over protruding roots. It was as if the forest itself was guiding him, clearing the way. Finally, Silver stopped in a clearing Jack didn't recognize. In the center was a circle of ancient stones, covered with moss and vines. The air seemed to vibrate with a strange, almost magical energy. "What is this place?" Jack murmured, approaching cautiously. Silver sat in the center of the stone circle and, to Jack's amazement, began to glow with a soft silver light. The cat's eyes, normally green, now shone with an intense golden color. A voice, soft but clear, resonated in Jack's mind. "Welcome, Guardian. You have found the heart of the forest." Jack looked around, searching for the source of the voice, but there were only he and Silver. Who's speaking?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I am the spirit of the forest," the voice replied, "and Silver is my messenger, the bridge between your world and ours." Jack looked at Silver in astonishment. The cat returned his gaze, its eyes filled with ancient wisdom. "For generations," the voice continued, "your family has been the guardian of this forest. Each generation has a feline companion, a guide between the worlds. Silver chose you, Jack, even before you knew your true destiny." The revelations hit Jack like a wave. His connection to the forest, his instinct to protect it, Silver's arrival in his life, everything took on new meaning. "But why didn't I remember any of this?" Jack asked, still confused. "The knowledge was hidden to protect you," the voice explained. "But now, with the forest in danger, It's time for you to awaken to your true role." Silver approached Jack and, with a surprisingly human gesture, placed its paw on the old man's hand. In that instant, a current of energy flowed between them. Jack gasped, feeling his senses sharpen. Suddenly he could hear the whisper of every leaf, feel the life pulsing in every tree and creature of the forest. "This is the gift of the Guardians," the voice said. "The ability to communicate with the forest and all its creatures. Use it wisely, Jack." With this new awareness, Jack understood the true magnitude of his responsibility. He wasn't just protecting trees and animals, but a living and conscious ecosystem, an ancient and wise being. "What should I do now?" Jack asked, overwhelmed but determined. "Learn, observe, protect," the voice responded. "The forest will face more threats. You must be prepared. Silver will guide you and teach you to use your new abilities." As the voice faded, the light surrounding Silver began to diminish. The cat blinked, its eyes returning to their normal color, but Jack could see that the intelligence and wisdom in them remained. "Let's go, friend," Jack said, his voice filled with new determination. "We have a lot to learn." Together, man and cat left the clearing, leaving behind the circle of stones, but carrying with them a new purpose and a deeper connection to the forest they now knew it was their duty to protect. In the days that followed, Jack immersed himself in his new role as guardian. With Silver as a guide, he learned to communicate with the forest animals, to sense the needs of the trees and plants, and to perceive any disturbance in the delicate balance of the ecosystem. Luna and her pack became even closer allies, acting as the eyes and ears of the forest. The jaguars, once distant and mysterious, now shared their wisdom about the deeper rhythms of the wilderness. Jack also discovered that his connection to the forest granted him renewed vitality. The aches of age seemed to diminish, and he found himself moving with the energy of a much younger man. However, with this new power came the understanding of the threats the forest faced. Through his connection, Jack could feel the pain of trees being felled in neighboring forests, the anguish of animals displaced by human expansion. One night, as Jack was meditating on the porch, Silver jumped onto his lap, its eyes shining with urgency. "What's happening?" Jack asked, immediately alert. Silver projected an image into Jack's mind. Men with heavy machinery approaching from the north of the forest. The threat they had faced before hadn't disappeared, it had only changed form. Jack stood up, his face showing fierce determination. "It's time to put our new abilities to the test, Silver. The forest needs us." As they prepared to face this new threat, Jack reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment. From a lonely old hunter to a guardian of the forest, with a magical cat as a companion and a family of wild creatures as allies. "Who would have thought?" he murmured, stroking Silver. The cat purred in response, its eyes shining with the wisdom of centuries. Together they ventured into the night, ready to protect their home and the legacy they now knew was theirs to safeguard. The adventure continued, and the forest sang its gratitude in every leaf and every breeze. Dawn was barely beginning to tint the sky with shades of pink when Jack and Silver ventured deep into the forest. The old man, now more agile and connected to nature than ever, moved with a grace that defied his age. Silver guided him, its eyes shining with a mixture of determination and ancestral wisdom. As they advanced, Jack could feel the forest's unease. The trees whispered warnings, birds sang alarm messages, and even the ground beneath his feet seemed to vibrate with anticipation. "They're close," Jack murmured, sensing the presence of the intruders through his new connection with the forest. Silver meowed softly in affirmation, and together they headed north where the threat was approaching. It wasn't long before they heard the roar of engines and the crunch of vegetation being crushed. Jack and Silver hid behind a thick trunk, watching in horror as a fleet of bulldozers and trucks advanced, cutting a path through the vegetation. "It's worse than we thought," Jack whispered, his heart pounding. At that moment, Luna and her pack emerged silently from the bushes, positioning themselves next to Jack. The jaguars, normally solitary, also appeared, their eyes shining with contained ferocity. Jack closed his eyes, concentrating on his connection with the forest. "We need help," he thought, sending a silent call to all the creatures of the wilderness. The response was immediate and astonishing. Flocks of birds darkened the sky, Monkeys leaped from tree to tree, and even snakes slithered across the ground, all converging towards the threatened area. Jack turned to his animal allies. "We must stop them," he said, "but without violence. We can't become what we're fighting against." With a plan in mind, Jack advanced towards the clearing where the workers were preparing their machines. Silver walked by his side, its fur glowing with a faint silver light. "Stop this immediately," Jack shouted, his voice charged with an authority that surprised even himself. The workers stopped, looking in amazement at the old man who had appeared out of nowhere. But their surprise turned to fear when they saw the animals emerging from the forest, forming a circle around the area. "This forest is protected," Jack continued, his voice resonating with the power of the Guardian. "Not just by law, but by forces beyond your understanding." As if to emphasize his words, Silver emitted a meow that sounded more like a roar, and the eyes of all the animals glowed in unison with a supernatural light. The construction foreman, a robust man with a yellow helmet, stepped forward, though visibly nervous. "We have permits," he said, waving some papers. "This project has been approved by the authorities." Jack smiled sadly. "Your papers mean nothing to the spirit of the forest. Look around you. Do you really think you can fight against this?" At that moment, as if responding to an invisible signal, the trees began to move, their branches intertwined, forming impenetrable barriers. Roots emerged from the ground, wrapping around the vehicle's wheels. Birds flew in formations so dense they obscured the sun. The workers, terrified, began to back away towards their vehicles. Some even threw down their tools and fled towards the road they had come from. The foreman, however, was not giving up easily. "This is madness. I'll call the authorities." "Go ahead," Jack responded calmly. "Call whoever you want. This forest has its own laws, and I am its guardian." As the foreman frantically dialed on his phone, a figure emerged from among the trees. It was Emily, the assistant of Jack's late brother, accompanied by a group of lawyers and government officials. "There's no need to call anyone," Emily said, advancing with determination. "These gentlemen are from the Department of Environmental Protection. They're here to inform you that all permits for this project have been revoked. This forest is now officially a protected natural reserve." The foreman paled, looking alternately at Emily, the officials, and the amazing scene of animals and trees united against destruction. Jack felt a wave of relief and gratitude. He looked at Silver, who returned a look of pride and satisfaction. As the workers began to withdraw and the officials started the process of documenting the situation, Jack approached Emily. "Thank you," he said simply. "How did you know?" Emily smiled. "Let's say a little bird told me." She winked at Silver, who meowed softly in response. "Besides, I found more of your brother's documents. He had initiated this protection process before he passed. It just needed a final push." Jack nodded, feeling a mixture of emotions as he thought about the brother he never really got to know. As the sun rose high in the sky, illuminating the forest with a golden light, Jack realized that this victory was just the beginning. His role as guardian of the forest was just starting, and there was much work to be done. Looking around at the animals slowly returning to the depths of the forest, at the trees returning to their habitual stillness, and at Silver, his faithful companion in this extraordinary adventure, Jack felt a deep peace. "Let's go home, Silver," he said softly. "Our work here is done, but our mission continues." Together, man and cat, they ventured into the forest, ready to face any challenge the future might bring, knowing they were now part of something much bigger than themselves.